So we're so happy to have Stephen Tette with us this evening. As you probably know, he is a multimedia artist. He grew up in the Lakeside Housing Project on the south side of Pontiac, Michigan. He's a Michigander. He can tell you on his hand where that is. Currently, he's a resident of Phoenix City. At 17, he joined the Army and has spent much of his adult life involved with the military. However, it was a gateway drug to higher education because he got his associates from Columbus State in 2008, and then followed that up with 2 degrees in art education, a bachelor's and then a master's, which he attained in 2013. As I'm sure we will find out more tonight, he's really committed to depicting African Americans, genre scenes, which is certainly something of importance since at least W.E.B. Du Bois talked about it in the early 20th century, continuing that tradition. Stephen we're grateful that he's been such a supporter of the museum over time. In 2014, he gave a Art with the Masters lecture here, and he participated in the 2016-2017 Let There Be Art exhibitions, which raised money for our education department. And what I'm hoping he'll talk a little bit about tonight, he's recently received some very prestigious commissions. One more local, from the school system. He was commissioned to paint a portrait of Mary Bussey, that's now owned by the school system. He was, as we see behind us, commissioned by Google to create their Veterans Day Google Doodle in 2021, and now that is going eventually to be part of their corporate collection at some point. If I don't steal it while you're talking and hide it from you. And then something I'm really excited to learn about and hope he'll tell us a little bit about, but a commission to paint a portrait of Calvin Spirey for the Georgia State Capitol. So without further ado, please help me welcome Stephen Tette.
Thanks, John. Now I'm all nervous. And what I like is that this is a nice, intimate environment. I may sit down, I may not. Okay. So the title of this talk is An Unexpected Journey, right? Unexpected outcome, right? When I started live, I was born in the housing projects, like John was saying. And I actually quit school and joined the military. I was born into a large family. I was telling this story earlier that my mother was valedictorian of her class at 16 years old, right? 60 years later, my daughter was valedictorian of her class and graduated from Yale University. But I was a high school dropout. They say, skip a generation, so right over me. But eventually I went back and I finished my education. So far, I'm not terminal yet. So, my artist statement. There's a lot of influences that happen within my life as an artist. Some of the most important were John Singer Sargent, and my favorite are the West African artists from the Edo tribe, that we don't even have names for. The contemporary artists are usually the African American contemporary artists that you know. However, living in Columbus, Georgia, if you're a figurative artist, you have to trace your roots back to Bo Bartlett. And Bo, I actually took his master class as a student. And he has influenced probably all figurative artists from Columbus. So I work in a conservative manner, a way that has been worked for years. I'm an oil painter, but I don't like to be tied to just being called an oil painter. And you can see that with my new works that I will be showing. So how did I get here? I got here through Uncle Sam. I was a soldier stationed in Germany. not knowing where I was going next. And I got orders for Fort Benning. And another friend of mine got orders for, I think it was somewhere in Kentucky. And we were the same grade, same age, same MOS. And he begged me to give him, let's trade orders. And I was like, no, I think I'm gonna go to Fort Benning. So eventually I came to Fort Benning. And Fort Benning introduced me to Columbus, Georgia. And one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life was a young man, his last name was Burks. He was from Columbus, and I was like, if everybody's like Burks from Columbus, I'm gonna love it there. And I fell in love with the city. Eventually I moved around again, and eventually I came back to Columbus. So during my service, part of my service, I was in the Gulf War. And at the time, it was probably still is, it was the largest man-made disaster in the history of our planet. So I have a couple of examples of what a day was like in the desert, right? These are actually photographs from the Gulf War. And this could have been 12 o'clock noon. You can come out the tent and all you would see is midnight darkness. So as an artist, I was afraid to tap into some of these images that I remember. However, through the coaxing of some of the professors at Columbus State University, I had an experience that most people didn't have that I could share through my art. So I started a series of paintings called Earth, Wind, and Fire, because there's no water in the desert. So the first one was a good day. That's a bad day. Probably the same time of day. This is my imagination of what those oil well fires were like close up. The truth is, you could only get so close. They were so hot and they burned so hot that you couldn't get this close without having the hazmat suits on and things like this. But this is my imagination of what it was like to be next to the oil well fires, serpentine fire. So this is another one of those imagination paintings. However, the soldier that's dressed in the hazmat suit this is not actually him, but this represents a young man. His name was Mike Riley. And Mike Riley died a few years after the Gulf War of cancer. So, and Mike Riley had a couple of unfortunate things happen. Unfortunately, he was under the rank of E5. He was below a sergeant. And anybody below the rank of sergeant had a duty. And the duty was they were in charge of burning the feces of everybody in the camp. So you're burning feces with oil well fires burning in the background, and you're wearing mop gear, which is in 120 degree weather, right? I couldn't imagine a greater hell on earth, but to then later on find out that, you lose your life because of it. So the only thing he was not required to wear that he has on is the mask. And that's the only thing that I would want to wear if I was out there. So Uncle Sam said, hey, you've been to war? Let's send you right back. But Somalia started off as a peacekeeping mission. So we went over there with one mission, and it was to feed, right? And at first there was these things that happen every now and then, rocks thrown at you. But when the mission changed, Somalia changed. and I was on the ground for the change. So there's a movie called Black Hawk Down, and in the movie, and whoever wrote the movie remembered a basketball court on the airstrip, and they had the two Rangers playing basketball on this basketball court on the airstrip. That was my goal. I took that basketball court over, and whoever wrote the movie remembered it, right? So they added it to the movie. But I was on the ground on October. So all of this war, all of this tragedy, eventually I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Nowadays, we know, a lot of the public knows what post-traumatic stress is. And there's a lot of treatment for it. But this is a painting I've done recently that talk about the post-traumatic stress, and it's called the 100-yard stare, which is what they used to, 1,000-yard stare, what they used to call a shell shock, or, where you sit and, your mind is somewhere else. I have some horror stories I can share later. While you're eating, that would be great. So, and these are my artistic expressions of post-traumatic stress. So this is called pin, tight, string dilemma, right? In my mind, this is what I imagine the mind of the person living with post-traumatic stress is like. So the grenade is a baseball-sized thing. And the reason they made it a baseball-sized thing is because boys throw baseballs. And they were used to that size, but it's tiny. It's a tiny thing. This painting was large. It was collected by a local collector, and it was damaged during a leak in their condominium. But this was my first attempt at describing the mind of someone with post-traumatic stress. This tiny little thing that has this stress, this pin, that string represents the stress, right? And if that pin is pulled, it can clear a large area. I was talking earlier how when the soldiers were coming back from Vietnam, they were greeted with a different type of emotion than the soldiers who came back from Somalia and the Gulf War. So I came back from the Gulf War and I was given the key to the city, right? But the key to the city was still tied to the stress that I had suffered while I was there. And this was this fight between the two, being honorable and then still being this weakened person, really kind of needed to be addressed by me. So this is another example of a pin, tie, string dilemma. And this is, I actually look like that underneath my clothes too. So, saying all of that, art has been my therapy. Art has been my release. Art has taken me from all of that to where I am now. And in that time, I have been very blessed to be moved to places where if it wasn't for art, I would never have been. Right? Governor Nathan Deal called me his favorite artist. And if he didn't mean it, he shouldn't have said it. Because I quote it all the time. So the first time I met the governor, I brung a painting, strangely familiar. And it was supposed to hang in the governor's office for 6 months. I got an email 3 months into the 6 months saying that the governor loved the painting and could he hold on to it for another 18 months. So it ended up staying there for 2 years.
Did you get it returned?
I did. A private collector owns it now. A few years later, they called again and said, hey, do you have something else that we could hang? And this was a series, so I was like, yeah, I have something else in the series. And this time I took my son with me, and he looks really scared in that picture. But prior to that, he was doing cartwheels on the governor's office floor, and kids. So, another example of things I've done. Recently, I did a community work for Girls Inc., and that was a mural on the basketball, the gymnasium wall. Mary Bussey, which is now in the Board of Education, and Calvin Smyrie, which is at the Georgia's Capitol building, hanging next to paintings that are 150 years old. And then there's something I did last year, which is so cool. So, 2 years ago, 2021, I got an email. I don't know if you can read it from where you are, but it says, Dear Stephen, I hope this email finds you well. And that you are interested and available to illustrate a Google Doodle. And when I got the email, I was like, this is a joke. Somebody's pranking me. And, but I kind of read through it, and I was like, they're not asking for anything important like my social security number. Like, they're not telling me there are prints or something. So I replied that, of course, I'm interested. It's the world's, I think it's the second largest platform behind TikTok now, but pretty soon it'll be the largest because TikTok's going away. But Angelica, Miss McKinley, she was the director at the time, and she contacted me. And when I sent her a reply email, she sent an email back to me, giving me all of the, the day they wanted Veterans Day. I'm a veteran artist. And she said—
Googled her to make sure she was a real person.
I actually did. I did Google her. Yeah, I did. That's how I was like, yeah, she's. But I didn't know if it was a prank until of the day it was online. And at 12 o'clock midnight, my phone started blowing up, and I was like, oh, it's real. So this Google Doodle I built it from the ground up. And Google was they knew exactly what they wanted. They gave me the dimensions. They gave me, even though it's going to be 2 inches, 2.5 inches in the palm of your hand, there's details in the painting that you have to get close to just to see. The awards that are on the uniforms, the names that are on, the details are there, right? This is a once in maybe 10,000 lifetime situations where your artwork is seen 1.5 billion times, right? So, and they were looking for an acrylic painting, and I'm an oil painter, and I was like, there's no way I am going to give Google an acrylic painting. I am going to paint this thing out. So these are some of the early sketches that were sent in. I'm not going to be mad at Google, but later on in some of the some of the doodles, they used some of my early designs that I had sent in, like the flag they used some of my work. So, the models for the Google Doodle, and one model in particular I'm going to talk about, but these are my friends. This is who I chose to portray. Hannah Israel, Andrew. Initially, I wanted to use this group the most, However, I did a sketch, let's see if I can go back, where I used a more heavy set marine, and Google said, no, we need somebody fit.
So they go because
Right. Well, we're talking veterans, right? Veterans, they don't always stay, they help. So I was thinking, realistic, and they were thinking idealistic. So, of course, I found another tennis player on the court, and I switched her out. One of the best things that can happen in art is there's controversy. And with this Google Doodle came a controversy. A lot of people believe that the Marine was a young man that was wearing a dress, right? And the Marines were mad at me. And a lot of them thought, because I was in the Army, that I was poking fun at the Marines, but that's not, she's just a young lady. But the last thing in the world I was going to do was correct them, right? Art is what you perceive, and if that's what you perceive, that's exactly what I intended to do. And in fact, thank you for giving me the ammunition, because unless someone asks me, that's a young man that's wearing a dress. Yeah.
But that's Charlotte, right?
I have no idea her name.
Right there, on the left?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know her? I just met her on the court one day.
I do, I know some of those people.
What? Well, yeah. I have no idea. I just met her on tennis court. So this is me in the process of working the Google Doodle. I had 5 days to do an oil painting, and oil painters know the oil has to dry. I did whatever I had to do to get, so I would work one side, work a different side, so I could stay ahead of the drying process. Oil paintings can take years, months. Even the Calvin Smyrie was a 3-week job. It was kind of rushed, but ideally I need at least 6 months to work an oil painting. But they gave me 5 days. And I don't know why I put this slide in, because I have the paint in my hand. So, the newest piece that I've been working on is something I'm very excited about, and you guys probably passed it on your way in. It's a church pew. And so the story behind the church pew is I'm a veteran, and I'm seen at Tuskegee, and I was driving back and forth between here and Tuskegee, and I would always pass this old church. At the time, I think I did see a sign that said it was an AME church, but I'm not sure. But the church was always run down, was in disrepair. But one time I was headed out to Tuskegee, it looked even worse, and they had all of the pews thrown out, and I was like, I'm going to get one of these pews. So I went to my appointment, and then on the way back, I stopped. I drive a big van, and so I went to the church. No one was there. I waited around. There was nowhere I could call anybody. So I waited a while, and I was like, they're not going to miss 2 of these pews. So I took, they were trash. So I took, most of them were damaged, water damaged. So I took 2 pews and I loaded them into my van. This was a couple years ago, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with them, but I loaded them up. They were beautiful to me as they were. I didn't know if I was going to be Duchamp and just do a fountain, right? Leave them as they are, put our mud on them and call them art. Or if I was going to do something like Picasso and the bull's head, right? Change the configuration of them, change them in a way. But I'm an oil painter, and I'm a figurative painter. And I decided that I was going to paint paint them, right? And I started with this one. And every little section of this painting has a different title. I do know that, and it's still a work in progress. But what I'm going to talk about now is the main seat, the backrest of the main seat. I had painted the figures on first, and I wanted something that would tie all of the stories together. So eventually, all of the stories would be tied together by something. And what I ended up choosing was fire, right? I was reading something, and I came across this this article about the church burnings that were happening in the 80s and 90s, and probably decades before that, and probably will continue to happen. And because of where I found them and the disrepair of the building, I started to think about this fire, right? So I said that I am going to tie all these stories together using fire. So saying that, I started to do my research. And let me take you to a different story. I was not born and raised in the church. The church for me was very foreign until I came to Columbus, Georgia. I was born in Michigan and probably went to church on Easter when I was young, right? But it was not who I was. When I got to Columbus, Georgia, I would meet people, and the very first thing they would say is, "Where's your church home?" Like, I'm in the Army. Okay? I'm in the Army. I don't have it. So, but I started to see the importance of the church as it geographically, right? It is so much more important in the South than it is in the North, where I was from. So I decided to tie these together with all the themes together with fire. And then I did my research, and I was like, is fire only associated with the burning of churches? Then I came across this research that says fire represents the presence of God in church. And I was like, divine intervention, right? So the fire had this dual meaning, not only this destruction of churches, but fire means it has, God is with fire, presence of God. So I loved it. I decided, hey, this is the right way to tie it together. And I started researching other paintings and works that included fire in church. And I didn't know the story of Pentecost, but I came across the story of Pentecost and how God, the Holy Spirit, the fire was like the tongues of fire, right? And El Greco's image of Pentecost is very similar to how I pictured Pentecost, how I pictured these individuals. It's untitled now. I'm not sure of the title, but it's very much inspired by the Emmanuel 9. And the Emmanuel 9 are the people from South Carolina who died in a hate act. Initially, all of the 9 figures were female. I was thinking of when I first started to go into a church. I went to a church and they had a female pastor. And I told my mother about it, and my mother was like, hey, you need to look up 1 Timothy 2nd chapter, 12th verse. And when I looked it up, and it was like, women should be silent in worship. And I was like, and I realized, and after going to churches, right, I realized churches wouldn't exist without women in their prayers, in their involvement. So that was my initial attempt at creating the pew, and I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I was like, 3 of these guys, 3 of these ladies gonna have to change. So I changed 3 of the ladies into men. I still wanted this presence of women up front, women leading the charge. However, and that's how I chose which figures I was going to change. I chose figures that were kind of either on the edges or towards the background, and allowed the women to stay forward. It's still a work in progress, but I've shown a few people, and I love the different reactions that I get. Like their worship is, it's on fire. It's basically the presence of God, or they look like they are praising through hell. And what is satisfying for me is the different interpretations of the same image is very satisfying to me. It's almost as good as people seeing what I never intended them to see. I think that's it. That is it. Thank you very much. I did. It was a significant payday. I can't talk about it because of the NDA. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
How did all this come out of a 17-year-old high school dropout?
Often we are a product of our environment. A 17-year-old inner city high school dropout is not exactly who I was, even though that was my circumstance.
But did you know you had this talent at that time?
Art has always been a part of me. So the earliest memories, people say, when did you learn you had a passion for art, or when did you learn? I was like, I wouldn't call it a passion, it's just who I am. So if I was where you were, I would probably have my hand on the table, drawing or doodling, listening. When I was going through all of my classes, you should see my notes. They just look like artwork, because that's how I hear, that's how I listen, that's how I remember. So if art history professor is talking about something, I'm drawing it, right? Those are my notes. My notes are not, I'm actually creating what they're talking about.
I'm reading a book right now called Memphis, and one of the characters in there does exactly that.
So I'm not unique. Yes, ma'am.
Why oil?
I don't know if you picked my brain, but I'm gonna tell you, I had always been a drawer. Everywhere I was drawing. I tried acrylics, as a younger person. I liked it, but it wasn't as satisfying as drawing. So I went back to drawing. I was still drawing. And then I took a college painting 101 class, and I got my very first set of oils. And it was like, oils is like an older lover, right? Drawing is quick, you can get it over with, get on out of here. Oil says, take your time, right? You can't finish today, you gotta come back in 3 days, because that white needs to dry, right? And it's that required patience that oils requires of you. You can't rush oils, right? And if you can, you're doing it wrong, right? And that requirement to wait makes the art so much better. Yeah. And it allows you to change your mind, right? You might work something different because you're required to wait. I love oils. I love what they do for me.
So when you were deployed and you were like in your barracks, did you have paper and you would doodle?
When I was deployed and I was in the foxhole, I would have paper, weapon right here, pencil and paper in hand, and I would draw. Drawing what's in front of me.
Imagining what might come.
I'm a realist, so most of the time I was drawing the other person in the foxhole with me. Yeah.
Tell us about the piece that you're wearing.
So, it's almost like you guys are picking my brain. This is a Queen Aida, I think that's how you pronounce it, mask. And there's two. There's one that is in New York, and the other one is in London. Recently, I had my DNA read, Ancestry DNA, and it came back, and I was 40% Nigerian, and they were able to pinpoint the area in Nigeria, and it was the Edo tribe. So the original creators of the mask, even though it's not a mask, it's only 9 inches high, and it was worn on the hip. The original creators are my ancestral people. So once I found out that I was from the Edo tribe, I decided that I was going to carve my own mask that I would wear. And basically the mask is a representation of the king's mother, right? And he used to wear it on his side. So my mother has always been super special to me. And whenever I am not wearing this, it hangs on a drawing of my mother. So this represents my mother, and she leads me in most places I go, and she is who I lean on for a lot of, she's not here anymore, but I still lean on her wisdom that she passed on to me. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters, so it's 9 of us, and she told me I was her favorite child. Yeah.
Did I hear you correctly? So that is your creation?
Yes.
Okay, and not from another artist?
No, this,
I'm more impressed.
yes, I carved this carving, the wood I chose was a maple, and it's extremely, extremely hard. It's a really hard maple. And this was so much work. This, yes, it was a lot of work. Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for sharing your experience in the conflicts and the result, PTSD. So can you share with us, if any, what role art played in your treatment, in your coming back from that 1,000 yards?
Okay, so the further away from conflict, sometimes, not for all, sometimes the easier it becomes. When I first came back from Somalia, there was no way I could stand in a room and talk, right? Art as a therapy, right? So the reason I couldn't stand in a room and talk was because I didn't know if there was a threat in this room, right? And art as a therapy, art painting these situations, painting these, I start to release what these false beliefs, even though I still carry some, and one is this hat, I'll talk about it later, but I start to understand that I carry false beliefs about the world, and art allowed me to take those beliefs and take them out of myself and realize there's nobody in there with a grenade, right? So I said there's still things that I carry, and there's people here that I've known for years. People in Columbus know me for 20 years, and they've never seen me with my hat off. And people's like, why do you always wear that hat? Well, the reason I wear the hat is because it's a security blanket. I started doing it when I was in Somalia. I would always have my hat on. I always wanted to be ready. So I would always have my hat on. And I started to build up this belief that if I have my hat on, I'm safe, right? Nothing's going to happen. I was in a convoy ready to head out to another base in Somalia, and I was sitting in a 5-ton truck. Beside us was another 5-ton truck that had a 50 caliber weapon on it, right? And 50 caliber weapons come with ammunition that's that wide, right? And we weren't leaving, and I was kind of irritated. I just wanted to get there and get back because it was so hostile. So I was like, what's the holdup? So I looked to my side, and there was a guy who is trying to load this 50 caliber weapon. And my driver said, hey, he has that thing pointed right at your head. And I'm sitting in the seat, and I could reach out and touch the barrel of this weapon. So I turned to him and I said some choice words, and he was like, yeah, nothing's gonna happen to you. And he turns it up range, and he pushes down one more time, and it says, boom. I don't remember the next 2 weeks after that. I don't remember the next 2 weeks. Those are the stresses that people don't talk about. There was investigations done, but for my driver to say, turn that weapon, right? That thing is meant to pierce armor. It would have went through me, him, everybody to the left of us until it hit the dirt or the ocean, right? So, put on the hat, stay safe. You're welcome.
Now, what brings you joy?
That's a good question. What brings me joy is defeating my enemy on the battlefield of a tennis court.
Should have known that was coming.
Someone says, is art your passion or something else? Tennis is my passion. Art is just who I am. It's just, I can't imagine myself without art, right? I'm always going to be an artist. But passion, I love me some tennis.
So maybe we need Google to give the Columbus Museum some money. I'm joking, totally.
Any more questions?
Why did Google have those requirements, specifications of the work of art when it's going to be digitally reproduced?
At that small level, I was not the first veteran to be chosen for Veterans Day as a veteran, but I've looked at all of the other artists, and we all worked on a similar scale. I have no idea, especially because of what I do and how it's going to be so detailed. Google still has ownership of this. The Columbus Museum wants it very bad.
How did they react if you did it in oil instead of acrylic?
I don't even think they noticed.
Excellent. That will surprise me.
But when I sent it to them, they were very, 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 very happy. And I thought it was going to be like, I'm sending you this, and then they're going to say, nice knowing you, we're going to move on to the next person. But Google has contacted me like 3 or 4 times. They've written articles about me after I worked, so I was so happy.
I think that they're planning to have, say, a museum or gallery where they're going to do for permanent things.
So initially when Ms. McKinley contacted me, she actually mentioned, okay, this, we'll figure out later how you're going to get this to us, right? And I was sent, I have a daughter who just recently graduated from University of Freiburg in Germany. She was salutatorian in her class. I told you, give Skip to anyway. But she's out there in San Francisco teaching, and I was like, hey, I could bring it out there, and they didn't reply. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Did your mother ever try to dissuade you from doodling in school when you were a student?
My mother had 9 kids, and See, my mother was a single parent too, of 9 kids. So it's very hard to give, especially I wasn't one of the bad ones. I was bad, don't get me wrong. But it's very hard to give your attention to 9 kids. So she never stopped me from, in fact, she encouraged me. In fact, when I started at Columbus State University, I was a biology major and I was going to teach biology. And she was like, hey, you were in the military for all those years. She said, follow your passion, follow your talent. And I think she was a little bit braver than I was because instead of just going studio art, I went art education. So yeah, I wasn't that brave.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.